How to sew the gift tote, part of the gift bag collection, available in 4 beautiful Christmas prints. Wrap your presents in style with this collection of 4 beautiful bags in a range of sizes and shapes. Cutting out. Cut around the outer edge of all the gift tote fabric pieces from the printed panel. You will have a gift tote outer front, gift tote outer back. You'll have the base, the outer side and the outer base, 2 side pieces, and the handles as well. Now, to line the bag, you need to use some of your own lining from your stash and use the outer pieces as templates to cut out the lining. Just place them on top of the lining fabric, pin them into place and cut round them to make pieces exactly the same. You'll have the gift tote lining front and back. You'll have 2 lining side pieces that will match up exactly, and you will have a gift tote lining base piece. Put them all together in a pile so that you know which piece is which. Making the gift tote outer. Take the gift tote outer side and the gift tote outer base and place them right sides facing along the short end. If your sides have a print direction, make sure you pin it to the bottom edge. Now you need to leave a 1/4 inch at the top and bottom so that you start stitching 1/4 inch from the top and you stop stitching 1/4 inch from the bottom. This helps the gusset to fold round the front and back when you're sewing it on later. So if you measure and mark those 1/4 inch marks with the pins, then you can start stitching at one and stop stitching at the other. Open out the base outer piece and then take the other side outer and pin that to the bottom. Again, if it has a print direction, make sure you pin the bottom edge of the side to the end of the base. Pin it into place and again, measure and mark 1/4 inch from the top. You can do this with a pin or you can use a pen if you prefer. And then measure 1/4 inch from the bottom. Now you need to sew together between those 2 pins on both of them. So you can see with this that there's a 1/4 inch left unstitched at the top and bottom. You've now made the long gusset piece. Now take the gift tote outer front and your joined long gusset piece and place it right sides facing on top so that you've got one of the side pieces on top. Match up the top raw edge and the long side edge and place some pins. You'll see it fits exactly. So where the folded open section of the seam allowance is, the edge of that will meet with the corner of the base as you can see here. And once you've pinned the top and the bottom, then pin it to place in the centre. Now stitch together starting from the top, but stop stitching exactly on the seam. Don't go beyond it, just on the seam, and do a little reverse stitch. Once that's done, take it out from under the machine and then fold the gusset strip. So now you've got the base section running along the bottom edge of the front outer. Again, pin the outer edge into place first so that the folded over seam allowance edge meets up with the corner. Just rearrange this bottom corner a little bit. As you can see, because you've left that 1/4 inch unstitched, that now folds round really nicely and you've got a neat right angle in that corner. That will give you nice crisp corners to your bag. And then pin it together in the centre. Now stitch together starting from that end, working all the way to that end, and again stop stitching exactly on the seam, doing a reverse stitch. Once you've stitched that into place, turn it round and pin the other side piece of the gusset up the other side of the front outer. Again, match the top raw edges first, then rearrange this corner so that it folds into a nice neat right angle, and then pin it to place in the centre. Then stitch into place, working from one end and working all the way up to the top edge. Now you've attached the gusset to the front outer, so you need to attach it to the gift tote outer back. this time, and this is done in exactly the same way. So just turn it over so that the gusset and the back out are right sides facing. Pin it together matching the top raw edges first. And then at the bottom, match the folded over part of the seam allowance to the bottom corner, as you can see here. And then pop a pin in the centre just to hold those raw edges to make sure that they're level. Then stitch from the top all the way down to the bottom, take it out from the under the machine. Do it in it, you're working in exactly the same way as you did with the front outer. I'm just showing you here where you pin it, but obviously you'll pin and sew and pin and sew and pin and sew, because you'll just get a neater finish. It's a lot easier than trying to battle with it under your machine, to be honest. And then pin and sew that side into place. Now the whole of your gift toe outer is complete. Turn it right sides out and push out the corners, and then you can give it a press. I've pressed the seams open, but I also fold it so that the seams, give it a press so the seams are laying right on the edges. It's easier to do that at this stage before you attach the lining. Now you need to make the gift tote lining. This is made in exactly the same way. So you've got the lining front, the lining back, then you've got the gusset sides and the gusset base. So stitch these three pieces, the two sides and the base, together in the same way as you did with the outer. Again, start and stop stitching 1/4 inch from the top and bottom. Once you've done that one, pin the other side piece. Again, measure and mark, so you start and stop stitching 1/4 inch from the top and bottom. Once that gusset is sewn together, sew it right sides together all the way around the edge of the front. Then when you come to the back section, there's just one slight difference here because you need to leave a turning gap, because this is where you're going to turn the bag right sides out. So when you sew this piece on, pin it into place exactly the same way as before, starting at the top, and then pin it together at the bottom, making sure that those seam allowances are in the correct place so that it all matches up. Now this time you need to leave a turning gap unstitched in the centre of this side. Well, you can leave it in the centre of the side. Actually, I've just realised it's probably better to leave it in the centre of the base. You can choose. Sometimes I leave it in the side, sometimes in the base. So when you come to do the base, measure and mark a 3-inch turning gap in the centre. And then leave that bit unstitched. Look, I've done all of that now. You can see I left the turning gap in the base. You can leave it in the side or the base, it's up to you. And that's where you'll turn the bag right sides out. Do press all the seam allowances open because it will lie flatter. And that's the outer and the lining finished. Making the handles. Take one gift tote handle piece and fold it in half lengthways with right sides facing. Then pin it together all the way along the length so that the raw edges are matching. Now sew it together down the length. Now before you turn it right sides out, press it so the seam is pressed open and in the centre. I've also tacked it together across the short end because I'm going to turn it right sides out using a turning tube, and it's easier to do this if you've tacked the end. Otherwise, if you don't have a turning tube, just turn it right sides out. Remove those tacking stitches if you've placed them in the short end. And then you can remove the stick. Now repress the tube so that the seam runs down the centre of the back, and then top stitch along both long edges to neaten and decorate. Trim off just the very ends of it, just to remove the fraying edges, and your thread ends. It's just easier to attach the handles if you've got nice neat edges. Once that's done, repeat this to make the other handle in exactly the same way. Assembling the tote. Take the tote outer that you've made earlier and measure and mark 1.5 inches inwards from the side seam along the top edge and place a pin there. Now take one of the handles that you've made and on the top edge, measure and mark 1/4 inch down from the top. And place a pin here. Now place this handle right sides down so that it's right sides together with the front, and place the outer edge of it at that 1.5 inch pin mark, and then make sure that it's extending 1/4 inch above the top and pin it in place. Now to make sure it's straight during assembly, pin it into place a little bit further down as well. A couple of inches is about right. Make sure the handle's straight. When you do that, you can measure that or just judge it by eye. Now measure and mark 1.5 inches in from the right side seam and place a pin. Take the other end of the handle and again measure and mark 1/4 inch down from the top. Now making sure the handle is straight and not twisted, place the outer edge of it at that 1.5 inch pin and then pin it together across the top. Again, making sure that the end of the handle extends 1/4 inch above the top of the bag. And then pin it together a little bit further down just to make sure that it's straight. So with the back of the bag, take the other handle and measure and mark and pin it in exactly the same way, in the same positions as you did with the front. Then tack the handles into place. You can see I've tacked them across the top and a little bit further down as well. That's just to hold it straight during assembly. Now place the bag outer and the bag lining right sides facing. So put the outer inside the lining. Now match up the side seams. So where the gusset meets the front and the back, match up these seams. Because you've pressed them open earlier, they'll lie nice and flat. So make sure that the seam is matching. If you just open them out a little bit, you can just roll one on top of the other just to double check. Or you can push a pin through the seams if you want to be absolutely sure. So match up those two seams and then turn the bag round and match up the other side seams. This will just give you a nice fit and make sure everything's nice and even. And then pin together the other seam. Now you can pin the lining to the outer along the front and back edges, and you'll see that the handles are extending 1/4 inch beyond this. This makes them extra secure so that they won't get pulled out when you fill your bag. So pin the front pieces together and then pin the back pieces together. Make sure the raw edges are matching. Then sew the two together all the way around the top edge. Once you've done that, it looks like this. You can see I've pressed the outer over to make it flat, just to make sure the seam lays on the edge. Now open out the two pieces, then find the gap that you left in the lining, put your hand inside and turn the whole thing right sides out through the lining. Open out the lining so that all the corners are in the corners, and then put your hand inside and push out the corners of the lining. It's much easier to do this before you close the turning gap, and do the same with the lining, just so that everything is nice and flat. Now you need to close the gap in the lining, so if you make sure that the edges are folded under by 1/4 inch, which is the same as the seam allowance, then pin them together. You can then sew them together either by machine or you can slip stitch the gap closed by hand. Once that's done, you can then remove that second row of tacking stitches that you put in and into the gift bag handles just to hold them straight. When you work the tacking stitches, make sure you use the longest stitch on your machine, then they're much quicker and easier to remove. You can just pin them and not tack them, but I find that the pins then get caught when you turn it right sides out. So just use a seam ripper or a small pair of scissors to just remove those tacking stitches and pull out all the loose threads. Now all the tacking stitches have been removed. You can put the lining inside the outer. So just push it in and then just put your hands inside and make sure that the base of the lining is sitting on the base of the outer, just so it's right inside. Now roll the top edge over to make sure that the seam is lying exactly on the top. If you press the seam open like I did before you turned it right sides out, it's easier to get this seam to lay right on the top. So fold it all over, and also it's worth pressing it at this stage as well. Then top stitch all the way around the top edge. Now your gift bag is finished and it's ready to pop your gift inside as a really special gift this Christmas.